Stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
Good evening, Johnson County. Welcome to this week's episode of The Breakdown. I'm your host, Greg Cooper, and here on The Breakdown, we deep dive local politics, mainly school boards and city councils. But any and all Johnson County politics are on the table. We air most Thursdays at 5 p.m., and you can visit the JoCo Community Radio Facebook page to watch shows live or to see replays. Also, you can go to www.jococommunityradio.com, where Apple and Android apps are available. Tune in to get the ins and outs of Johnson County, Texas. Tonight on The Breakdown, we're going to be discussing an upcoming election. This isn't the May election most people are familiar with. This is going to be an election on March 5th. And we have the pleasure of having one of the candidates to join us and to introduce himself to you, the listeners. He's running for the Johnson County District Attorney's Office. And again, the election will be March 5th, 2023. It's the primary election date here in the state of Texas. So it's just a few months away. And before we introduce him, let's talk about what a district attorney is and what they do and the relationship with other county attorneys. The main duty of both the county attorney and the district attorney is to represent the state in criminal cases. Both work with law enforcement officers in the investigation and preparation of cases to be heard before criminal courts. Typically, the county attorney represents the state in minor and misdemeanor type criminal offenses, and the district attorney represents the state in felony cases, ones that are more serious. These public prosecutors determine whether prosecution in any given case should move forward, and if so, pushed to a successful conclusion. As with all elected county officials, the district attorney has ultimate authority over the operations of the district attorney's office, including the authority to hire, the authority to fire personnel, and direct their daily activities. The district attorney also has authority to determine how to use all other resources allocated to the office. This is especially important during the budget process and forward thinking. So how your tax dollars are spent, the district attorney has the say for that area within the county. Tonight, here on The Breakdown, we're discussing the Johnson County District Attorney's Office, more commonly referred to the DA's office. You'll hear us refer to it as the DA's office. And again, district attorneys are felony prosecutors, so these are the more serious offenses, and they are empowered to gather criminal evidence to present their cases to trial if there are grounds for prosecution. So for the first time in a long time, residents of Johnson County will have a choice. The Johnson County, Texas DA's office has gone unchallenged for well over 20 years. It's been on cruise control with the same individual, the Honorable Dale Hanna, being the current district attorney. He's held that office since the 70s, and for all intents and purposes has done a fair job. Who is the Honorable Dale Hanna? Well, again, he was first elected to office in, I believe, 1979. He's been serving for well over 40 years. His current term will end at the end of 2024. Here again, this is the primary election here in March, but his term will end, if not reelected, will end at the end of 2024. So we have some time, and the individual today is trying to get ahead of that. It's a big part of who will be the future of the DA will be decided during that primary election. And again, this is the first time that this office has been challenged in more than 20 years. You can learn a lot more about the current Johnson County District Attorney at the county's website. It is www.johnsoncountytexas.org. and there's a district attorney's section on there. And we have reached out to the Honorable Mr. Hanna's office, and we've offered him the opportunity to participate tonight. We've extended the opportunity to appear on a future episode, and we hope he decides to come in and talk about his long-standing holding of that office and his accomplishments. But tonight, though, we begin to look at the future and to see if it's time for Johnson County to revisit who's managing the district attorney's office. And we're going to try to deep dive whether it's time for some new blood to be introduced into the leadership and direction of the DA's office. Today, we have Mr. Tim Good. He's the first one again in many, many years to challenge Mr. Hanna. And he has accepted an invite here tonight to talk about his platform, his goals, and the reasons for asking for your vote, the citizens of Johnson County, to trust him with the reins to a very, very important county office. Mr. Good, welcome to the breakdown for your first time. Hopefully we'll have some more before the election here. And tell us just briefly a little about yourself, your background, and why you want to run for the district attorney's office.
Okay. Well, Greg, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the chance to be on your show. A little bit about myself is 39 years old. I've been an attorney for 13, 14 years, prosecutor for over 10 years, over a decade. Married to my wonderful wife, Melanie. We met in law school. We have 2 young boys. So we live here in Johnson County. Now, that is kind of my basic background of who I am, my family life, stuff like that. Going back before that, I graduated from Grace Preparatory Academy in Arlington, Texas. From there, I went to University of Texas at Arlington. Always knew I wanted to be an attorney, but I didn't want to do the poli-sci track, which is political science major. And so I decided to do business school. And so I got a bachelor's degree in marketing and a minor in finance and econ. And then from there, I kind of had a crossroads. I had the opportunity to get a degree in a master's degree in advanced statistical analysis for marketing campaigns, things like that, or continue with a plan to go to law school. I ultimately decided to go to law school. Now, the funny thing about law school, you'll probably talk to any attorney, they're going to tell you, when you plan on going to law school, you have an idea in your head what you want to do when you get to law school. And probably 99% of those lawyers will tell you they were wrong when they started out. So my plan when I started going to law school is I was going to go and I was going to focus on real estate transactional law. That was my ultimate goal. I got in law school. I loved law school. It was a tremendously great experience. I went to Liberty University in Virginia and I met my wife there. But in that process, when we got out, it was 2010. And that was the height of the financial housing market collapse. So there were people with 20 years experience in real estate transaction and they weren't getting jobs. So my chance of getting a job was zero in that field. Now, also in law school, you develop an idea of what you don't want to do. And I was like, I do not want to do criminal law. That was just kind of the perception I had in my head. Well, my first job out of law school was doing criminal defense for 2 years. And I really enjoyed that process. But through a series of events, I didn't want to stay on that side of the fence. I really want to do prosecution. Moved down to Austin with my wife. She got a job as a state prosecutor down there. I worked for the State Office of Appeals, done employment law for about 2 years. But I really wanted to do, I was having a transitional shift. I wanted to start doing courtroom stuff. I wanted to get into prosecution more. And so we went down to Corpus Christi, Texas. I was down there for about 4 years, and I did CPS cases involving significant neglect and injury to children. Doing that was tremendously rewarding because you got to get kids out of a really bad situation, parents who are either killing one of the siblings or significantly maiming one of the children or drug overdose, things like that. But at the kind of conclusion of the 4 years there, I started realizing that it is as much rewarding as it was to get those kids in a safe place. That was not enough for me. I really wanted to get involved in the criminal aspect of holding those parents accountable for what they did. And so from there, my wife also got a job up here as a federal prosecutor up in the DFW area. And then from that point, I got a job at the Johnson County DA's office, which I've been at ever since.
Fair enough. So, Mr. Good, before we get into the details and into the specifics about your platform and your goals for the Johnson County District Attorney's Office, I want to ask a question. So, considering the district attorney's office mainly is dealing with individuals accused of crimes and the legal path towards guilt or innocence, why should the average law-abiding citizen care about this office. For example, I don't plan on breaking the law. I've never been convicted of any crimes, and I hope to never be. So why should someone like me and other, for the most part, law-abiding citizens that aren't engaging in criminal activity, why should they care about who runs for the district attorney's office when they're out there handling individuals that have been arrested and brought to the county to stand justice? Why should the average citizen really care about this office?
That's a great question. So it's actually a two-part response to that. The first part being, you just look to New York City, look to San Francisco, places where there's not a good DA's office. And you can clearly see, even though you are not planning to commit a crime, no one is, crime affects your community. And so whoever runs that office is really going to determine what is acceptable, what is permitted, what is allowed. So the average citizen, the DA in this county, so we bring it back to Texas, bring it back to Johnson County, the DA sets the tone for how felonies are going to be prosecuted and tolerated within the county. So though on a daily basis, going to work, picking your kids up, going to church, it doesn't feel like the DA's office affects your daily life. It does, because it's in the sphere of which we all operate. So as your safety is directly affected by how the DA does his or her job. Now, the second part is, you don't intend to commit a crime. We see tons of examples across the country of people like Mr. Penny on the subway in New York. There are things that you could do that are completely, I would argue, lawful. They're lawful. But depending on how the DA decides to pursue cases, whether they're being influenced by social media or some kind of agenda, you as a law-abiding citizen can find yourself in a very bad situation, because the DA has a lot of authority and a lot of power to make decisions about actions that you take, even though they would, by all intents and purposes, appear to be lawful, such as self-defense. That's going to affect you when you least expect it.
So to touch on the two examples you gave. So I used to live in Midlothian, Texas, and I lived with in my neighborhood, there was a lieutenant who worked for Dallas Police Department, and they had gone through a shift within that area to where they decided to not prosecute any theft that was under, I think at the time it was $750. So now obviously for the businesses and the citizens that live in that area, that could be very impactful. Is that an example of something you're talking about that a DA somewhat has control over? Is that, or am I missing that?
No, you're dead on.
Okay.
I don't think it was the Dallas PD that made that decision. That was a decision, I imagine, made at the DA office level, saying we are not going to accept cases in this category. So then the police, they can make an arrest, but nothing's ever going to happen with that case. And what's the point of making an arrest if it ultimately is not going to be handled by the DA? To give you an example that probably all familiar with, if for some reason somebody came out and said in the city of Burleson, we're not going to give you speeding tickets if you're less than 20 over the maximum speed limit, we're all going to start driving close to max over the 20 speed limit.
Sure.
You're allowing something permissively to happen. So yes, it does affect. And that brings a whole nother issue of prosecutorial discretion, which is a big thing we see. And we can kind of dive into that more later, but the prosecutor, whenever they decide that there's a whole category of laws they're not going to enforce, is really breaching their oath to what they're supposed to be doing. It is not the DA's job across the country to pick which laws he or she likes, because that's problematic, because then you have one person. With the whole point we have down in Austin, we have our legislator that makes laws, and whatever laws they pass, every DA in the state of Texas needs to enforce those laws. Even if the DA does or does not like the laws, that's your sworn duty to do that. Now, some people would say, well, the DA needs to stand up for certain things here and there. Now, there may be constitutional issues where that comes into play, but it is a very dangerous game to allow one individual to totally veto a law because he or she, based on their feelings, political ideology, whatever it may be, to just say, we're just not going to do that. For example, you could be pro marijuana, think it's completely fine. It's illegal. And so for a DA, particularly as an example would be maybe Dallas, to say we're not going to prosecute that type of drug crime, it creates unlawfulness, lawlessness based on a decision of one person.
And our society has ways to change laws. So there's valid avenues to go about to address those issues other than a unilateral decision by a single individual.
Absolutely. Well said.
So, so we talked about the first one about choosing not to enforce certain laws. So the second one you brought up was a DA not picking and choosing what to pick up. Would stand your ground law or the castle laws, and I'm probably misquoting those, to where you're defending your home? Is that an example of what a DA can protect rights with and not choose to prosecute? Am I going down the right road with that?
No, I understand exactly what you're saying. So
Okay.
self-defense absolutely is a big part. Backing up a little bit, when you have to use deadly force in the state of Texas or anywhere else, there's also a big question about the system around you, the law enforcement, the DA's office. Have they done a good job? Because a lot of these places we see people having to use violence to defend themselves and their family, there's a whole systemic problem underneath that involves the police being hamstrung, not allowed to do their jobs. The DAs condoning a bunch of different kinds of crimes that leads an average citizen to be stuck, like the example of Mr. Penny on the subway, where he has to defend someone else because no one else is stepping in and they've allowed this environment to fester. Now, the stand your ground laws and things like that, the DA's office, like there are legal defenses that come up in trial. The things, you're giving an example of the Castle Doctrine, justifications, but you're getting all the way to trial. And so that's something you can bring up and a jury can decide. But the DA on the front end also should be looking at cases and saying, there are rights. It's an inalienable right we have as a human being to protect our lives
Sure.
and our lives, our family, or even other citizens. So you got to look at that on a case-by-case basis and say, is this something that needs to go to a jury? Now, I do believe that there's a lot of times where you've got this kind of toss-up thing. And a lot of times the best way to decide that case is for a jury, ultimately to get that case and say, is guilty or not guilty. But there are a lot of cases that should be pretty clear, and trying to use these as examples for national media attention or whatever to single person out, I think is honestly appalling.
Fair enough. So thank you for that. Found out you were running, and I love having candidates on that are running, and so started looking at your website, your Facebook page to try to get an idea. So straight from your Facebook page on basically your platform, we're going to go down some of those things. We're going to let you talk about them,
Okay,
and let you communicate with Johnson County residents on your philosophy of how you would manage this office. And one of the interesting things that I found on here, we've covered the first two already, but what is your main criticism of district attorneys around the country, which you're putting this as a reason you would run? So what is your main criticism with how the district attorney offices are being run across the country, generally speaking, that you can help solve?
absolutely. So one of the things that started the website, so I did do a website. It's goodforda.com. And the reason I did it different from a lot of campaign websites is because I've been a voter since I was 18. And I try to be educated on people I vote for. And I get so frustrated throughout my voting time as an adult looking at campaign websites and realizing that there's not a whole lot of information. I don't know what I'm voting for. I see a lot of platitudes. I see I'm tough on crime or I'm pro Second Amendment or whatever it may be. They're buzzwords that no one ever fleshes out. And so then you think you're voting for somebody. I mean, for a perfect example, Joe Biden says he is pro Second Amendment, but he seems to think that has something to do with hunting deer or something like that. I don't know. So I want to give the citizens of Johnson County and Somerville County a chance to actually understand what I think about things and be transparent. And you can like it or not like it, but I want to know I want you to know what you're getting. I want to be fair and answer questions. I want to be transparent. And so that's the whole point of these questions. Now, to the question you have about nationally, and there's not a whole lot that I can do to nationally change the scene, but I can keep it from changing here, I think is the big thing. And my biggest complaint about the national scene is what we talked about a little bit, which is prosecution discretion or prosecutorial discretion. And what that means is that the DA has the ability to decide to take a case or not take a case. And that's the end of it. And so a lot of places like Dallas or other places say, like we talked about the marijuana cases and things like that, they're just not going to take certain cases. And I think that's a violation of their oath of office, which is they have to enforce all laws. Prosecutorial discretion is designed to be a case-by-case basis, meaning when a case gets filed, you look at everything. And there's got to be some play in the joints between law being applied to a specific set of facts. And that's what that's about.
So they're abusing that and blanketing it. Is that?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's never supposed to be a categorical exemption for any type of law. It's supposed to be designed that when you look at this case, this particular theft or shooting or whatever it may be, is the law being applied to it? Is that the best way to handle it? One, do we need to do different charges? Or even more drastically, is this a case that just doesn't need to be brought forward because it doesn't really meet the spirit of what the law is trying to do in this situation?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, and I'm going to correlate this to kind of one of the hot topics in Texas, you hear everywhere you go in Texas, California's moving here. California, don't California my Texas,
Right.
don't California my Texas. Well, a lot of what you're talking about with this prosecutorial discretion stuff is things that you see about like in New York, like you said, but San Francisco being a huge one to where literally every single shelf in convenience stores have to be behind locks.
Right.
So am I understanding you correctly that your goal is to put up a barrier and to have a wall to be very selective on transitioning to more West Coast ideology and be more law driven and legislative driven? Is that correct?
Absolutely. And part of it is I'm asking the people of Johnson County, Somerville County, to make a change. And it is a scary proposition for anybody. Everybody says, why would I change something if things feel like they're going well? And I'm trying to lay out my principles of what I'm going to adhere to. This is not a 180 change for Johnson County and Somerville counties. I'm laying out that, I'm a conservative Republican. I am tough on crime. I'm tremendously pro law enforcement. And so I'm giving examples. That's the fear. I've had several people ask me, are you backed by Soros? And at first I thought
no, it's a fair question these days.
Exactly.
I got big reach.
I thought that was, at first I found that comical. And then I started thinking, I love that question because people are cognizant of the power, one, the DA has, and two, DAs have been getting slipped into different communities and ruining those communities. And so I love the fact that people are asking that question. The answer, of course, on your radio show is no. I would love to have his money. It would be misused according to his purposes because if you look at my platform, we don't have the same ideology at all. But no, but I want people, like when you look at the Q&As, to understand the differences between me and the national scene, and that a change is not a dangerous situation to be in. It's something that's actually, it's a forward thinking. There's a lot of things, and we'll talk about this more, things we need to change to meet the coming change within Johnson County. Change isn't always bad, but change happens no matter what, and you have to be prepared for that change.
Sure. So one of on your platforms, how does the issue of parental rights relate to the role of the district attorney? And parental rights are across the country kind of under siege in a lot of ways.
Right.
How does your platform and where you want to take Johnson County District Attorney's Office and affect parental rights, and how are you going to manage that?
Right. So the big point there is I want to reassure people that parental rights are a big deal to me. I mean, the thought that the government can raise your kids better than you can is just ludicrous. No one's going to know your kids like you do. No one's going to love them like you do. And so that is the fundamental core. And I think the family unit is the fundamental building block of our society. With the DA's office, I'm pointing out is that there's tremendous power, even within Texas, for the DA to get involved. So injured to a child statute. If you read through that, there's a lot of discretion within that statute of what is considered to be an injury or child abuse and what is not. And so you look at that and you can see it applied in other places across Texas, Barrett County or Travis County. Spanking in those counties can be child abuse, right? And so I'm trying to reassure and point out that that is not an area where I think it's rife for the DA to be getting involved. There's going to be some zone of disagreement about, what people do, but I think there needs to be a strong line between, like, I'm not saying everything's permissible, right? Significant abuse of children, sexual abuse of children, domestic violence. I'm not going to tolerate that. But there is a world of a difference between that and some things we kind of disagree on about what's happening within a home. I think that's better decision made by the parents. It's not something that the DA's office needs to get involved every single little time that there is a question about what's happening within your house.
And this goes back more of to your approach to a case by case basis on how to determine those. So let's talk Second Amendment for a while.
Okay.
And you have on here that just like many other politicians, you're pro Second Amendment. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but whether guns are at seas across the country, whether they're going after primers to prevent ammo from being harder, whether they're taxing it, whether it's more difficult background checks and all that. How do you fall on Second Amendment issues, and how would you approach that in such a hunt heavy, gun heavy, pro gun county in Texas?
Mm-hmm. Tremendously pro Second Amendment. Now, the point being, everybody says that, right? In Texas, you're not going to get elected unless you say you're pro Second Amendment. Even nationally, you're not going to. But if someone stops with that phrase, I'm pro Second Amendment, you do not know what they're talking about. Like I said, Joe Biden says he's pro Second Amendment. Then he talks about get a double barrel shotgun if you need for home defense, or you don't need 30 rounds of ammo to shoot a deer. Where they wearing Kevlar vest? When you start breaking down politicians, what they believe about the Second Amendment, I don't think Second Amendment has anything to do with hunting or sportsmanship. It is clearly designed for one, your protection. It's your right that, some people say, well, if you have the police department or whatever, you don't need all these things. You have a right to defend yourself. You have a right to keep your family safe. And whatever form that takes of what kind of firearm, if you can lawfully and legally own a firearm, I think you should, if you feel like that's something you need to do. And part of that is the DA's office is people are always concerned somebody's going to come in and take my guns. And the DA's office, if I'm elected, is not going to be part of that kind of thing where we start infringing on people's Second Amendment rights to protect themselves. And that includes the magazine bans, things like that. I own AR-15s. I think people have the right to do things like that. I think that's clearly anticipated by the founding fathers in the Second Amendment. And so that's going to be one of those rights that's tremendously respected. And it's a thing we're very jealous and we guard in Texas, but it's something that can be very easily taken from us if we're not careful by who we elect.
So we got about a minute before we get to our break here.
Okay.
And I found this a very uncommon thing to see on a platform. And it's, what duty do you think each citizen owes their community, and how can each citizen play a part in shaping and protecting their community? Most politicians say, everybody sit back and I'll do all the work for you. And here it sounds like you're encouraging that citizens have a role to play in our democracy and preservation of rights. And I love this. So let's talk about this before break.
Absolutely. So I completely agree with that. The politicians, there's always this talk about, they don't use these phrases, but they always talk about a magic button. If you just give me power, I'm going to fix everything for you. I never seen anybody press the magic button and fix everything for us. But the most important thing you're going to do as a citizen is first is vote. You've got to get out and vote. And it's not the big national elections. You got to get out there for the local elections, the ones that really affect you. But the second thing is you got to serve on a jury. I've never seen someone get mad about, I got to go vote next, Tuesday. But when you get that jury service, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to go serve on a jury. And we could talk about this more in a minute.
Yeah, we'll come back and talk about jury duty. We're here with Mr. Tim Good, running for Johnson County District Attorney in March. We'll be back with the breakdown.
Attention all business owners and creative minds. Do you need a unique and personalized touch for your products? Look no further than Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs. I'm Ron Phillips, co-owner of Romika Designs. We offer custom laser engraving services for a variety of products, including promotional items and corporate or personal gifts. With state-of-the-art equipment and a team of skilled designers, we can engrave intricate designs on virtually any material. Whether it's a special message, a company logo, or a custom design, Romika Laser Engraving will help you make your mark. And the best part, our prices are affordable and our turnaround time is quick.
I couldn't be happier with the work Romika Laser Engraving did for me. The engraving on my product was precise and exactly what I wanted.
So don't wait any longer to add a personal touch to your products. Call Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs today at 817-400-4040 or visit our website at romikadesigns.com. We look forward to helping you make your mark.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395.
So, welcome back to the breakdown. We're here with Mr. Tim Good, who's asking for Johnson County residents' votes for March 5th primary for Johnson County District Attorney's Office. It's been unchallenged for over 20 years. And before we get back to where we were, I want to remind everybody that JoCo Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas, and is live 24/7 on the TuneIn Radio Network. TuneInJoco.com is the place to find all the ways to listen and watch, and the station app is also available for free on Android and Apple devices. Simply search your store, check out our lineup and more at www.jococommunityradio.com. This episode and more brought to you by Next Level Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to your Texas sales rep at 844-TEX-HAIL. That's 844-839-4245. And be sure to dress your arms and more at thetiffy.com for some of this colder weather as we get deeper into winter. And before we get back with Mr. Good here, I want to talk about an event coming up that Mr. Good will be at, and it is, we're trying to get him on a panel, and it looks like he's going to be on a panel to ask to answer some of these questions. It's called Unveiling the Crisis, and it is January 8th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. at Open Door Church. And it's hosted by Families Engaged for Effective Education. And again, Open Door Church. And Jocko Buens is going to be there, and Lance Cashin. And they're going to be discussing about how to protect our kids in Johnson County and beyond. And as Mr. Good spoke earlier, early on in his legal career, this was what he was involved in. And he decided to get into the prosecutorial side to help hold the people accountable that were hurting our children. So that's an event on January 8th at 6:30 at Open Door Church. It's presented by Families Engaged for Effective Education, and it's called Unveiling the Crisis. And anyway, so back to where we were here, and we were talking about citizens' position in voting and jury duty. And before I let you go on, as a veteran, people always ask me, they always want to thank you for your service, thank you for your service, thank you for your service, and it's much appreciated when we say that. But if you want to, and I always say, if you want to thank a veteran for their service, live your life in a way that honors the sacrifices our veterans made, and that's things like voting, and that's things like jury duty.
Exactly.
So let's get back onto the jury duty aspect, because your insight into this was eye-opening for me, because everybody's jury duty, I don't want to do it. Talk about why that's important.
Absolutely. So going back to voting, right? So when you vote, you elect everybody from your school board to your district attorney, to your judges, to your legislators create the law. It's a great process, and we're all excited about to do that. But one of the things we've done in Texas, which is fantastic, is they've said when those laws that get created, when those people, it all comes back to an individual citizen accused of a crime, we're going to be there. We're going to have 12 people on a jury, and we're going to make a decision. And I love that, because we, the people, are holding the power, and we're holding the state accountable. And so when that comes back around, those 12 people sit there and they decide, did the state meet its burden? If the state did meet its burden, they also have said, we're going to be there for the punishment phase, which means once we decide that someone has committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt, what are we going to do for our community? And so I think that's a big thing. And so I always talk to juries when I have jury trials about this. Actually, one of the first things I bring up during voir dire, which is when most people are familiar with getting called down the cattle call. There's 100 people in a room, and they never get picked, and they feel like, well, I feel like I wasted my time. I can assure you, you didn't. One of the things is being there, showing up. We don't want people showing up for jury duty. We're not having justice one way or the other. It turns out you got to be there for that, and then to be open and honest during that process. But you're serving an important function just as much as the people who get picked as the 12 that sit in the box. And then the people in the box, once they finish the trial, one of the great things I've always enjoyed is at the end of a trial, I get to, hopefully if the jury wants to, get to talk to them. And when I do, I ask them, like, was this what you expected it to be? And I've almost, to a man and a woman, they've always agreed this is more rewarding and a better experience than I ever thought it was going to be. Even in the tough cases, even the cases we have child pornography, and they actually have to see those images. They say, I never want to have to see that kind of stuff again, but it's eye-opening. One, you get to see the types of crimes committed in your community, and you get to make decisions to protect your community. And most people say, like, when's the next time I can come back and serve? And so the perception people have when you open that mailbox and you get that summons, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so is it not? It's not convenient. Liberty is not convenient. The way we preserve our liberty,
Absolutely.
you have to make sacrifices. And I know for some people it's hard to serve for a week on a jury, but the impact you make on your community is it really just can't be measured. We can change Johnson County and Somerville County jury verdict by jury verdict. You basically get the community that you're willing to put the time in to build.
That's one thing great about Texas is they do give a lot of good local control. And here, that we have a responsibility of being residents of the area that we are to be involved in that process. So the last thing we're going to talk about on your platform here is something I thought was interesting. You say that since Texas law says it shall be the primary duty of all prosecuting attorneys, including any special prosecutors, not to convict, but to see that justice is done. So before I ask you what that means to you, everybody, thinks that they don't get a fair shake in the justice system. There's favoritism. This isn't a Johnson County thing. This is a generally speaking thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
That the cops were targeting me. They didn't like my case. They didn't pick it up. They were too heavy-handed with justice, whatever it is. So it's interesting that you bring up that's something that's such a common perception about justice. And here again, it's not their job to convict, but to see that justice is done. What does justice being done mean to you, and how will you bring that philosophy to Johnson County District Attorney's Office?
Absolutely. So what justice means, it means that each individual is treated the same. There can't be a two-tiered system of this person has more influence, they're tied in the community, they get a different standard of justice. This person is use the term a nobody, so they get a different set of justice. Justice needs to be equal to everybody. And no, cases have to be case by case, but there shouldn't be any kind of modifier to justice. It can't be this person's access, this person's lack of access, this person's race, or whatever religion, whatever it may be. Justice needs to be based on the facts. Is this a case that needs to be prosecuted? And if that's what it requires, then you go for the prosecution. Even if you've got somebody that, is not a good person and the facts don't line up, that person doesn't need to be prosecuted. You don't need to shove a case through based on the person being accused. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do with what they have done.
And it, I was in the medical field, and we had a symbol, and it was a caduceus, right? The eagle, snake, and the sword and everything, but or the staff. But justice has a very symbolic symbol, and she wears a blindfold.
Right.
She wears a blindfold and has a scale. And there's a reason that our justice system is meant to be blind, and it's very good that anybody that has such power to take somebody's freedoms away will approach it that way. So we're going to go down some other questions here. One of the big things that you have to deal with, you're very, very dependent on law enforcement doing their job effectively, efficiently, accurately, unbiasedly.
Absolutely.
So what is your approach to dealing with law enforcement agencies and maintaining a productive relationship, since that's a very symbiotic relationship in the overall process?
Well, you've hit on the key thing right there. It is the relationship between the DA's office and the local agencies that either make or break the justice system within Johnson County. And so you have to have that fostering relationship with each and every agency, and you have to have communication with those agencies. And so when you have the agencies, one, making sure they're equipped with what they need, they understand the expectations of the DA's office, the DA understands the expectations of the agencies, you have that relationship. That is the key thing. And that's one of the reasons I feel like that's a part of our system currently that has fallen apart. I don't feel like we have the relationship with our local agencies we had 5 years ago. And the reasons, you can try to point to a bunch of different stuff, but I just don't feel like it's there anymore. And I've talked to officers individually from all agencies, and they seem to feel the same way. So don't take my word for it that that's what's happening. Go find, just find a local cop and say, do you feel like the crimes in Johnson County are being prosecuted, the way you expect them to? Do you feel like you're respected by the DA's office and treated fairly? How do you feel about how, crime is being handled in our community? I'm running for an office, so I'm going to say something. So I want you to fact check me and go talk to people and say, is this really true? Because I think the thing we're all kind of assuming in Johnson County is everything's been running great. And so we don't think crime's up. We don't think the police are dissatisfied with the way the cases are being handled. And unless you go to the police officers individually and ask them how they feel, you're never going to know.
So That's awesome. And there's so many different law enforcement agencies within Johnson County, and there's so many different personalities. It's got to be tough to manage, going from big city like Burleson that's well established to the really smaller towns, like Godley that
Mhm.
that have a very immature department. So that's got to be tough. I'm going to talk about some high profile cases now, not specific cases, but
Okay.
there's been a lot of high profile stuff that's happened in Johnson County recently. Joshua ISD had some stuff make national news. Godley has been on the news for a couple things with the school district and the city. And I don't think any of this stuff crossed the district attorney's desk. However, there's no question that there's things that are making big time national news in Johnson County. How would your approach to dealing with these high profile cases and influential individuals that attract media attention? How do you deal with that in a small rural community like Johnson County?
You got to decide it's not going to affect the case. That's the big thing. I think you see nationally charging decisions being made, people being singled out because either the public outcry or social media, wherever it may be, affecting the case. And going back to what justice is, every person needs to be treated equally, right? And just because you've been singled out by the mob doesn't change your case. It goes back to it's not about who you are, it's about what you did. And it's not about who is focusing on what happened. It needs to be what the law enforcement, the DA's office looks at, and they don't allow someone behind them to tell them this is what we expect to have happen. Because that's not justice. When you have the mob saying we expect a certain result, that's going to skew the system. And that one's going back to Lady Justice being blind. She's also got to be deaf too, to some extent, because you can't have the mass mob saying that this individual person, we want a certain outcome. They got to go to prison to this. You have to focus on, once again, the facts of the case, not who the person is or what everybody around them is saying.
So to pivot from that and your approach to high profile cases, how would you handle a situation where you believe the defendant is innocent, but the evidence points towards their guilt, or vice versa, where you have a personal feeling in that, but especially if you pretty much know they're guilty, but the evidence is what it is. How would you navigate that? And then obviously that's going to be under a larger microscope in a high profile case.
That's a hard hypothetical because it doesn't actually have a concrete fact pattern, right? So generally, as a prosecutor, I've never tried a case that I didn't think the person was good for. You've got to have, you can't just be a hired gun and get up there and just argue for whatever. I think you have to have some convictions. You have to have some ethics behind that. The ultimate, like we talked about before, the ultimate goal of the prosecutor is to see the justice is done. It's not to see a case won or a case dismissed. So if in a situation where my assessment is the person's innocent, I hope I get that conclusion based on the facts and not based off of, influence or my personal opinion, whatever. It really needs to be fact driven. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But that's something I think is a good point. You have to be cognizant of. You have to be very careful about what influences you and how you make your decisions.
So we talked about your infancy in law, where you were dealing with children.
Yes, sir.
And you're going on the Unveiling the Crisis, protecting our kids in Johnson County and beyond it, presented by Families Engaged for Effective Education. How have you handled cases involving sensitive subjects or vulnerable victims, which children would fall under?
Absolutely.
There's a big problem, and it's probably going to get exponentially bigger with our border crisis. How do you deal with, and I'm leaning towards there's more victims that are considered vulnerable than children, but how do you lean towards those sensitive subjects?
Absolutely. And so I've tried a lot of cases that involve sexual abuse of children. And also with juries, when we try those cases, I go back and talk to them. It just, people don't realize how common that is. And I hate to say that it's common, but the number of cases involving sexual abuse of children is skyrocketing. And you can do a bunch of different studies, look at a bunch of different things and figure out why that's happening. But it's kind of an undeniable thing. Part of it is, I think, we don't know as parents what's out there, what's influencing our kids, or what kind of access. Like, just to kind of give a brief example, we live in a world now where after dinner, your kid can go upstairs, get on their phone or the game system, and you're downstairs doing the dishes. And that portal gives someone access out there anywhere in the world to your child. And I've had online solicitation of minor cases where someone reaches out either through a game system or through a phone, and they talk to the kid. And our children are not really prepared for that. And also, as parents, we are not aware of what is out there, the true threats, and what those portals allow people to have access to our kids.
What I would love to see in law enforcement, I mean, this probably isn't from the DA's office, but a community outreach. I'm 51 and I got a 4th and 5th grader. And I mean, I didn't grow up with tech. And I would love to see some form of outreach to educate parents on what to look for and how to look for that.
Oh, we could absolutely be. So with that, that'd be a perfect example of the DA's office being out in the community. So I would also love to see the same thing where you would have either meet with parents or with school talking to kids at schools and having in-service meetings where you have an officer talk about things and a district attorney talk about things, because also kids don't know the threats out there. And so approaching it from both sides of the coin. I remember being a teenager. I'm sure you do too. Your parents say, this is the thing. This is what we're worried about. And you're like, oh, come on, this is ridiculous. I think you have someone else also saying, this is the threat out there. And this is the danger, when you realize why your parents have said, this is why we don't want you involved. And this is where it could lead to. Hopefully that opens some people's eyes.
Absolutely. And talking on tech and some of the challenges with the youth of today, how would you keep up to date with changes in law and legal procedures? For example, the Honorable Mr. Hanna, who you're running against, he's been in place, embedded since the 70s. He has gone from a legal, I don't want to say the systems necessarily changed, but the advances through technology and where we were in the 70s compared to where we are now moving forward, and how that exponentially is accelerating the technological advances. How do you keep up to date with the changes in law and legal procedures, and how do you pivot tech and technology into how you would run the DA's office?
Okay, good question. You have to be intentional. You have to say that, one, keep it, like you talk about law. You have to be intentional, keep it law. Law always changes. Like technology changes, law changes. You have the legislature creating new law. You have case law, which is the courts interpreting legislation. And so if you don't intentionally try to keep up with that, then you're going to fall behind, right? So what do? Things that I've done is every Monday I try to read as many of the criminal court of appeals decisions as I can and see what is relevant to what I'm currently doing now. Take notes on that. We go to CLEs. Everybody that's in legal practice has to do a minimum number of hours of training, but you got to really do more of that. You have to be proactive. I've said that some attorneys practice for 20 years, but they practice the first year for 20 times over. If you're not being intentional in how you're approaching the practice of anything, I don't care if it's law, business, being a physician, if you're not intentional in what you're doing, you just keep repeating stuff. You have to seek out and learn. Regarding technology, there's a lot of things that need to change, particularly with the DA's office in Johnson County. We are far behind what our sister DA's offices are doing with regarding tech. A perfect example would be cases are still being filed at the DA's office in paper form. What does that mean? So when a agency, let's just take Burleson, for example, they have all of their stuff digitized, their body cams, their reports, everything is on the computer. They have to print all that out, walk it over to the DA's office, and file it as a physical case. Now, what's the alternative to that? You can get a system, for an example, let's say TechShare is what Tarrant County uses. You can have a system where you have a digital, just like send an email, you send the information over. There's no printing out information. Well, why does that make a difference? Because when the case gets filed, there's missing supplements, you need someone to update something, or body cam link's not working. You can just call the agency and, like, snap your finger, the information is back to the DA's office in the full form you need it to be. That'd be one of the changes I'd love to see happen there.
So just real quick. So the way I'm understanding this is, like, you have police departments that are digitally recording and record keeping their stuff. They have to remove their items from digital platforms and put them on paper to facilitate the DA doing their job in Johnson County.
Absolutely.
Today in 2023.
Exactly. I think it goes one step further than that, because the law is we have to provide digital discovery to defense attorneys. And so then when those paper copies come back in the DA's office, we then scan those back into a digital form that's only used by the defense. So we're redundantly having a process when simply TechShare is also a system that allows the defense attorneys to have access to information too. And so there's no need for that extra step. It's a waste of time, in my opinion.
It seems like a waste of exorbitant amount of man hours.
Yeah, and I think it absolutely is. Another factor by having something like TechShare is, let's say you have an investigation happen in Godly. So you have the Godly Police Department working a case on one individual, and you have somebody at, let's say, the sheriff's office doing another investigation. They don't know they're investigating the same person. And so you may have an ongoing like theft or fraud or something like that. There's no way for them to know that without communicating. But you can't call over every time. I got person X. Are you looking at person X? No, I'm not. A system where everybody's linked together. You can see other agencies working on other people, and you go, oh my gosh. So this suspect that I'm working on right now has 2 open cases, one with this agency and this other agency. We should collaborate together and not waste time and resources.
Absolutely. That's mind blowing that they're that behind the power curve. Um, how do you ensure the rights of victims are upheld throughout the legal process?
That's a good question. So the rights of the victims there is laid out in the Code of Criminal Procedure what rights they have. Before the 90s, so there was a bill called the Victims' Rights Act. In that, before, people didn't really have a chance to be involved. They were not really kept in queue in the system. What was happening to the case that they were the victim in. So that's why they have victim impact assistance coordinators created. They're supposed to be notified of hearings, things like that. Things that I've personally done is you've got to engage as a prosecutor with the victims, reach out to them and say, because you can't expect them to reach out to you. People don't know the system. Like you said, how does the average citizen, why should they even care about the DA's office? On the flip side, when you're the victim, you don't even know how to access the DA's office. So part of that is actually reaching out to victims and speaking to them and saying, here's the process. Let me explain it to you. And I've done that multiple times, particularly kid cases. I'm talking to moms and dads about the most horrific thing that their child is experiencing and say, I want to be here. And there are no dumb questions. Here's my phone number. Call me back. And I've been able to develop relationships, but also help later with trial, because ultimately it helps those parents trust the DA's office, the one, we're doing the right thing. And 2, we're going to be there when there's any kind of concerns, because it's foreign. Like you said, it is something that most people have never been through as a criminal justice system. It's even worse when you're the victim of a crime, because you've got the hurt and all that trauma. And now you're trying to navigate something you should never have to be involved in the first place.
Well, and I'm sure it's difficult to juggle because you can't compromise the integrity of the investigation, but at the same time, closure is important for especially victims of sensitive crimes.
Absolutely.
There definitely needs to be closure, and they definitely have to have just part of that process of healing. It's very, very important. One of the problems, here on the breakdown, we talk about, school districts, local city councils, and local politics. And one of the problems that we run into a lot here is we run into the problem between necessarily doing what's right, owning mistakes, and being accountable, and sacrificing that for protection of an image. So, for example, 2 different school districts, Joshua ISD, Godly ISD, both have bad books involved with them. Joshua ISD has a bad books. They send out parental notifications, say we've identified bad books. We're trying to take care of this. We're gonna do better, and this isn't appropriate here. Godly ISD just acts like it doesn't happen.
Right.
2 totally different ways to protect and deal with image. The district attorney's office has a lot of control over Johnson County and their image. Is there anything about how you would facilitate managing the district attorney's office to where you would place image over doing what's right? Or do you know any examples of that?
So to answer that question, if you worry about image, you're not doing the right thing. I think the biggest thing, particularly DA's office or anybody, is you have to be transparent. Because there's a lot of distrust across the nation with the criminal justice system as a whole. And part of that is due to the lack of transparency. And I think if we're more transparent, I think as your elected official, you need to be more open and willing to meet with people and explain things to them. Then I think people, if they understand behind the curtain what's happening, that mystery is gone. And if it's about protecting image or protecting other politicians, you're doing the wrong thing. Because once again, it goes back to what is the primary duty of a prosecutor? To seek justice. And justice is not about trying to dress it up and make it something different. Wherever a case or facts lead you, that's where the conclusion is. It can't be, I don't like the road we went down. If you're worried about what road you're going down, then you're not seeking justice, you're seeking something else.
So to pivot off that, how do you handle situations where there's pressure to secure a conviction because the evidence isn't compelling? So we talked a little bit about that earlier about how you navigate that, but I can't imagine, evidence is what it is, and it's not always there, but how do you handle situations to where you really, really are being pressured to secure a conviction? It's not there because, and I'm not saying, obvious answer is, well, you follow the justice, but how do you mitigate the damage and fallout in that communication is that an education piece? Is that an outreach piece? How do you navigate that?
It definitely could be an education piece. Part of that process is first figuring out, pursuing the case or not to, is that being driven by something behind you? Is it being driven by the public outcry? And it doesn't need to be, right? Once again, it goes back to this case, this facts, and where does that go? There are going to be some cases. Like the idea that every case tried by the DA is going to be a slam dunk case, that doesn't happen. There are some times where cases, they just need to go to a jury. Because I think there's something really important about 12 people deciding the case instead of just saying, oh, we're going to dismiss it or we're just going to plea it out. So in some of those cases, it needs to be you 12 have been picked to decide this case, and you let them decide the case. And whatever they decide, that's what the community lives with, right? Now, I think your question also implies, what about those cases that just are not good cases? They shouldn't even be getting to a jury. Those cases, like you indicate, like you have to dismiss them. And you also, it should be important to talk to first person you need to talk to is if it's a victim involved case, talk to the victim's family and really work through with them why this is happening. Because we got a victim's family, they know what they experienced, they know what happened. You got to work that through, but there's also a difference between what you've experienced and what we can prove in court. Then after that, it's talking to the public and explaining this is why this particular case was treated this way. Because once again, it goes back to being transparent.
Absolutely. And communication is so important and it's so overrated. And a lot of government entities really just feel like they don't have to. So it's good to hear that you would prioritize that. Before we close here, I want to remind everybody about Unveiling the Crisis, Protecting Our Kids in Johnson County and Beyond, January 8th at 6:30. Mr. Good, tell us your website, how to get in touch with you before we close.
It's goodforda.com. And Greg, I appreciate you having me on. Have a Merry Christmas.
You too. Thank you for the breakdown. We probably won't be here next week. We're waiting to decide. We will be after the first of the year, hard and heavy, and hopefully we'll have Mr. Dale Hanna on. Have a good day.
And Grandview to Godly. This is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.
Hey, travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820. Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
To be wild.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of Texas Wild with Ryan Prigmore, Adventures from the Water to the Campfire. Tonight, we have an especially interesting show for you lined up. Tonight, we have Rusty Arnold, brother of one of the ladies in the missing trio, and Wayne Spears, one of the divers who helped investigate the case. Welcome to the studio, gentlemen. Thank you for coming on the show tonight to talk about what's important to you.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. And also we have C.L. Mayhew, which stands for CLA.
Don't do that again.
He is the newest member of Blue Diver Search and Recovery, and we are over the moon to have him in here with us to talk about what he knows, what he does, why he does it, and who he is. So, Rusty, tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here.
Well, back in December 23rd, 1974, my sister decided she wanted to do some last-minute Christmas shopping.
Yeah.
And she went over to pick my mother up, and my mother couldn't go because she could take care of my dad. He had cancer. He was at the shop. She had to go up there and be with him. And
What kind of cancer did your dad have?
he had melanoma.
Melanoma?
And it spread all the way to his brain. And
Metastasized.
he was only 39 years old,
Holy crap.
He was too young for that, but
Definitely.
So she called Renee from my mother's house and went over to Renee's grandmother's house to pick Renee up.
What are their last names?
Renee Wilson, Julianne Mosley's the 9-year-old we should talk about, and then my sister's Mary Rachel Trelisa.
I could never remember. I could never figure out how to pronounce that name.
A lot of reporters over the years have had trouble with it. It just aches me when somebody goes Trelika.
That's what I always thought it was Trelika.
Yeah, it was Trelisa.
Trelisa. Okay.
Okay. And well, when Rachel got over there to pick Renee up, Julie come out to the car and said, I want to go with y'all. Well, they said, you're going to have to go call your mom and ask permission. And she did. And she begged and begged and begged and begged and begged. Her mother finally said yes. And that's the last time she ever saw or heard from her daughter.
Wow.
But they left there and they went to a Army Navy store first to pick up some bell-bottom blue jeans, hip hugger bell-bottom blue jeans that I think it was Renee had them in layaway.
Right.
So they went by and picked those jeans up, and then they went to the mall. And we think they left the mall around 12:30 and went back home just for a few minutes. And I'm not sure about what happened after that. They just vanished, and we never.
I never knew they went back home.
Yeah. We have a deposition from a person that told us that she met him back at the house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, she told us it was to pick up Sean. Sean was Tommy's 2-year-old son, Rachel's stepson.
Right.
So his mother was supposed to go back and pick him up. We never identified Sean as even being with the girls.
Huh.
We had Terry Mosley, which is Julianne Mosley's brother. He came out to the car and he was talking to the girls. And I asked him years and years and years later, like 40 years later, I said, when you went out to that car and you talked to Renee and Rachel, did you see a kid in the car? No, I didn't. There was no kid in that car. And I'm going, where the hell's Sean? She's supposed to have been dropped back off at, So it was the morning time when they went over there. And then she says she's supposed to go pick up Sean at, around 1 o'clock at Rachel's house. Where's Sean?
Never was seen, never was picked up, nothing.
No.
So what happened after that, do you think?
I don't know.
They just disappeared into thin air and were never heard from again.
That's right.
What kind of headway has been made on the case since then?
Well,
what have you done in terms of hunting for them?
I can't tell you how many holes I've dug. I can't tell you how many lakes I've searched. It's too many.
Talk to me a little bit about the lake searches. What'd you do?
Where we got the cars out of the lake?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we went out there with a guy named Dennis Waters in the beginning. I had the idea.
Appropriate name for searching the lake.
I thought it was kind of cute. He had a boat with the really good sonar on it, real good stuff. And he was the best sonar technician in Texas. They say even in the world.
Right.
He taught sonar to all the police around, the game wardens and stuff like that. But he came out here. We called him and told him we wanted to search Benbrook Lake because a friend of mine told me that they think there's a possibility that there might be a car in the lake. We were missing a car from one of our suspects. He was missing a car, so it made sense that they could possibly be in that lake. That's when the dive team got involved. And we decided, let's go back to where Dennis Waters checked the lake. Within 20 minutes, we found 3 cars. Just
boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Found
3 cars. And
he must be good at that sonar business.
Oh, yeah. He was the best, He's recently died, though, so.
That's unfortunate. I was going to look him up and see if he could tune up my sonar for me.
Yeah, well, he's gone. And that was a sad day.
Sounds like it.
But anyway, we found those 3 cars, and then the dive team got involved. And I had one dive team before Wayne and his dive team. I had another dive team go down, and they actually were the ones that dove on the cars for the first time.
Who was the dive team you sent down the first time?
I can't recall their names.
Did they have a group name?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it was just 3 individuals.
Okay.
But they dove on the cars twice, and the second time they stayed down so long they made themselves sick. They got sick, and they wasn't going back down.
Wow.
I guess they wasn't as experienced as Wayne here. I don't know.
Well, Wayne is a pretty experienced diver.
Well, we got the dive team out with the second dive team. They dove on the cars. They brought up pieces of the cars. Matter of fact, I have some of those pieces of the cars in my living room right now, just as memorabilia.
Do you have a license plate I can talk you out of?
From the cars?
Yeah.
No. We didn't find any license plates on those cars, did we?
No, well, you got some rust.
A lot of rust.
Lots of rust.
Well, they came up with a plan that they were going to pull the cars.
And they did, right?
We had benefits. We took donations. They raised the proper, I think it was $15,000. The dive team rose. I didn't raise that.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
Wait. Rusty helped, though. He got up and sang.
I did. I sang my songs. I did.
Band
sang your heart out, I'm sure.
He did. He did.
Thank you, Mike.
Sounded good. And I wasn't drinking either.
Do you still perform?
No.
Oh, okay.
I only play with myself nowadays.
That sounds bad.
It was supposed to.
Well, we're not overseen by the FCC, so
good.
You can say whatever you want, but be gentle with it.
Well, anyway, we dove on the cars. They brought me pieces of the cars, and we identified the pieces they brought up. What years, make, and model was not the car we were looking for, and we knew that before we dove on them to pull them.
I remember hearing somebody say they could see on the sonar that one of them was an old Impala.
1963 Impala.
Yeah.
It was, and is that the one that fell apart? Yeah, because with Lincoln, we got the Lincoln and the what was the other one?
Mark
Mark IV.
No,
Mark IV, I think.
Mark IV was Lincoln.
Yeah.
Well, no, that was the one that was in the cove. One
Yeah.
that weighed like 12,000.
They had all the
Two
bricks on
Lincolns.
top of it.
Bricks on top of it?
Oh, somebody dumped a whole load of bricks on top of that car.
Why?
I don't know, but I have one of them in my house.
Huh.
My
Weird.
mother has one.
That's
I've
weird.
Got,
That's
I've
weird.
got 5.
I like to keep memorabilia from each search that we do.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I've got a lot of it. But it's only been 49 years, right?
Yeah, that's not that long. Only half a century.
Yeah. December 23rd of this year will be 49 years. Been a long time. But anyway,
Well, you know, funny stuff happens on anniversaries sometimes.
Well, I got married on December 23rd.
Yeah.
They say I did that to break the curse of Christmas past. Because
Did that-
everything bad happened in my family on the 23rd of
Did
December.
it work?
Nothing bad's happened since. It's been 32 years.
Well, congratulations, man. I'm glad that you were able to lift that curse. That's good stuff.
Yeah, 32 years. Couldn't have found a finer woman.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah. I did really good in that direction, but I got lucky, I should say. She turned my life around, and she's really special.
Right on. That's good.
Back to the cars. We got the cars out. I can't remember what that third car was. Weird car. It had a motor in the trunk. Corvair.
Ah, yes.
Was it
Sandbags on the front wheel wells.
1960 Corvair, wasn't it?
It was a 60 model. Yes, it was.
1960 Corvair. We got the VIN number and ran it, and we got hits on both those cars on the VIN numbers. I don't have that information.
Were they stolen?
One of them was. The Lincoln was stolen.
Really?
Yeah, it was stolen. They went for a joyride, just drove it off in the lake. And we found the trail at the very top where the cars could drive off. That thing's been, where they could get to it, that's been chained off since 1978, I think.
That must have been a spectacular destruction when they drove that car off and watched it careen into the lake.
Right off the cliff.
Wow.
And the Lincoln was stolen. I found the names of the people that owned the Corvair. I can't remember that. It was 3 years ago. And
Right.
it didn't mean anything, so we just didn't document that. Didn't need to.
So you didn't go around to any of the people who the cars belonged to, like documented owners, and be like, "Hey, we found your car."
The people that owned the Lincoln, it was a brand new Lincoln back then.
Yeah.
And they just reported it stolen. I guess it got replaced. But I talked to the grandchildren. The people that owned the car did deceased. So
yeah.
But that's pretty much where we are with that.
And nothing ever came of what you brought out of the lake. No. There were no clues. There were no evidence. There was nothing concrete tying any of those cars to this case.
No.
Well, okay. So what led up to the lake search? Wayne, maybe you can give us a little bit of insight on that. What led up to searching that lake for those cars? What sort of preparation did you have to go through in order to prepare yourself to do these blackwater search and recoveries of these sunken vehicles? I mean, I'm sure you were familiar with airbags and compressors and all that before you got to this job, right?
Yeah,